Okay. Hello, welcome everybody to our unusual meeting today. It's 10 o'clock in the morning in Poland. Usually, when we at the Institute of the Good Death organize um, these conversation meetings, they take place in the evening. But today it's a different situation because it's an international event and we have invited some friends and colleagues from Australia. Over there, it's 8 in the evening, so we managed to find a possibility to find a time slot that works for all of us. Uh, just a few words how it actually happened that this meeting is taking place. A few months ago, I think it was February, there was a really amazing event in Brussels, in Belgium. It was called the Death Literacy Symposium. And people from all over the world who professionally work in the field of palliative care participated. And that's where Rose and Beck and me met. And since then, we've been in touch and we decided, okay, it would be really nice to have this conversation, not only on a local, but on a global level. So we have invited them, I say that in the name of our NGO, the Institute of the Good Death. We are an initiative that works in the field of education about dying, death, and grief. And yeah, we want to create different spaces in the public area also where we can just talk about these topics because they are normal and natural parts of life. And before I make an introduction into our topic, I would like to ask our guests to briefly introduce themselves. So maybe Beck, you go first, and then Rose and Lauren.
Yeah, hi, I'm Beck. I went to the Death Literacy Symposium, as Anya said, and connected because I was brought there by a beautiful human called Dr. Kerry Noonan, who was also a part of the Good Death Impact Network in Australia. And we sort of had this idea, we were all talking about if there's an Institute of the Good Death in Poland and a Good Death Impact Network in Australia, like, should we not be having conversations? That seems like, it comes together quite nicely. So I work in Australia I live in Tasmania, so it's that little island under Australia that gets left off most maps. But yeah, I work as an independent funeral director and mortician and end-of-life doula in my local community. So I kind of have a bit of a broad scope, and I run a couple of things external to that. So I'm a co-founder of the Australian Home Funeral Alliance, and I'm the current president of the Natural Death Advocacy Network as well. So, supporting community death care around the country and yeah, having those conversations. Um, and before I just hand over to Rose and Lauren, something that we do in Australia when we meet, gather, educate, is we acknowledge traditional owners of the land. So if you could indulge me just for a moment, I am here on the lands of the Malukaday people. That is Lutruwita, Tasmania. It's right down south. Rose is also on those lands, and you can see she's in Gadigal land at the moment. Our Indigenous people of this country have lived here for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. They have been the continued custodians and caretakers and knowledge holders of this land. And they have endured with their connections to water and sky and culture and sea for all of that time. We get to live and work on these lands because of their custodianship, and that land was never ceded. So we would like to acknowledge the elders and the traditional knowledge holders of all of the lands on which we're on, and also send our respect and our gratitude for their continued, endurance through colonization and through genocide. And that gratitude extends to, any First Nations people with us. Rose?
Yep. Dzień dobry, everyone. Dziękuję bardzo for coming. That's the. Now, don't expect any more Polish out of me. That's my schoolgirl Polish. My name's Rose. I've been a nurse for over 40 years. Um, a lot of that time has been spent in oncology and palliative care. Um, I'm currently a palliative care nurse, and I'm a doula um, in so much as I do more community education than anything at the moment, because my day job is preventing me from being particularly able to spend more time as a doula and to do the doula work. Um, and I've just had a career long passion for um, palliative care, and just in the last sort of 8 to 10 years, really trying to foster conversations around death and dying, and trying to reclaim death and dying back to the communities where it belongs, and to sort of wrestle it away from the medical profession and the funeral industrial complex. So that I currently live in Victoria, but I'm actually in Tasmania at the moment writing a book. So that's why I've just had dinner with Beck and driven back to my accommodation. So it's lovely. Thank you. That's me.
Thank you, Rose. And Lauren.
Thank you. Oh, it makes me so happy to hear that you had dinner, Beck and Rose tonight. Hi, folks. It's wonderful to be here. I'm Lauren. As Beck mentioned, I'm on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people, which is also known as Sydney, in Australia. And I have the really good fortune and privilege of convening and facilitating the Good Death Impact Network for about 7 years now. I'm not a practicing end-of-life practitioner in any sense of the word. So when I started facilitating this network, it was really eye-opening about what I guess, where death and dying and grief was at in Australia. And there is I think probably similarly to many parts of the world, not a lot of focus and attention on this. So often there's not a lot of funding, but there are a lot of amazing, amazing people. And I can say, like, hand on heart, I've met the most incredible people like Beck and Rose through this network who care so much about supporting people in death, dying, and grief. And it's just been such a pleasure to be alongside the work. I'll share a little bit about the network later, but yeah, just really nice to be here with you.
Hmm. Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, I've had the pleasure to listen to a few lectures or workshops by people living in Australia. And so a few years ago, I came across this tradition, or this intention of sharing acknowledgement at the beginning. It's something that always moves me a lot. This is not something that is practiced here. I'll try to do that now in a very clumsy way, not really knowing how to do it. Um, because this part of Europe, there has been so much turmoil also historically, and I'm actually not Polish. I'm half German. I'm half Croatian. I'm here in Poland, in the land of the some kind of Slavic people. I guess that's how we would describe it, but I actually have no idea how to phrase it, how to name it. But I would like to express also, yeah, honoring our ancestors, and also what our ancestors have gone through on these lands, especially in the 20th century, where still so much pain is resonating from that. So, Lauren, you said there in this field of death care there is very little funding, but there are amazing people, and my heart was like, yes, I know this when you said that. I also feel very much kind of at home between people working with this topic, with the end of life. I cannot really explain it, but people who get into this field, they tend to have a very open heart and at the same time be very grounded in a way. Maybe to get a first like overview, like all of you named different functions that you actually have. Usually, when people ask me what's my job, I also cannot answer with one word, but I have to say, yeah, I founded an NGO, but I'm also a death doula and a grief counselor, and I do funerals. So all of us, we do different functions connected to supporting people at the end of life. And maybe you could give us like an introduction into this landscape in Australia. Like how does palliative care actually work in Australia? How is it structured? Are there hospices? If yes, what kind of hospices? And where are the doulas? Like, are they part of the healthcare system, or how does this work at the moment?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yes, please. Hmm.
Yep. Yeah. Um, yeah. So palliative care is a free service across the country. Um, they talk about the postcode lottery of palliative care. So depending on where you are in the country, um, the quality of the palliative care that you have access to can vary. Some places are really well serviced, and other places, and particularly the rural and regional areas, of course, it gets a little bit light on the ground. Um, but in general, there's there's generally palliative care services, community palliative care services across the country. Um, and so they provide support for people who are dying at home. Um, they might accept somebody who's sort of might have 6 to 12 months to live, depending on how stretched they are staff wise. Some services, when they get right down to the bottom of the barrel in terms of staffing or funding, it comes down to 3 monthly. So they're basically just putting out fires, saving somebody from the very final stages of their disease, which is not ideal, but and other places are much better served and can take somebody on, 12 months out or even longer. Um, there are some hospitals, and it just depends on whether the hospital decides to fund it or not, palliative care physicians and palliative care specialists in a hospital setting, in the acute setting, say. Um, and that can be a palliative care physician, or it could be nurse practitioners, just depends on who's around. Um, there's standalone hospices across the country, and generally they are funded privately for some, in whatever form that takes. Either the community has rallied together and funded this hospice, um, or it's under the auspices of a church. And they can be either again a residential, like a hospital, like an inpatient hospice, or it could be a community palliative care service that's actually called a hospice. So
Mhm.
like I say, it's a postcode lottery. You never know what you're going to get. um, but all of our services are free. I know the research says that at best, most people who are facing a life-changing diagnosis and grappling with the illness and um, all the fun that comes along with that, usually have about 1 hour out of their day at most that they might spend in front of some kind of health professional, and the rest of the time they're at home by themselves with their family, with their carers, whoever's in their orbit. And so that 1 hour is about as much as you're going to get in terms of support. So the idea of, we want you to die at home, and the gold standard is that people usually would prefer or would choose, if they could, to die at home. I think statistically it's about in the late 60s or 70% of people say they'd like to die at home. But without a lot of unpaid support or support garnered from other places, you can't do that. Even if you've just got one carer, that may be beyond the capacity of your one carer to manage that by themselves.
Mhm.
And
Is
there's a
that
lot of gaps that, like,
yes? That's
yeah, so when someone gets diagnosed with something, they might initially go into hospital for treatment, and then maybe it's surgery, but then they'll get released from that hospital, and they will then, the people they've had in the hospital, they might have had a occupational therapist or a speech pathologist or something in hospital. They'll get discharged into community, and those providers are different in the community. So then, you've got to get used to a whole new set of things. As an outpatient, maybe still seeking treatment, but then there'll be a point where the treatment stops or ceases or is no longer working. So you'll be discharged into palliative care, and that's a whole new set of people. And then, you might, as Rose said, if the gold standard happens and you get to go home, then you've got new community carers and new people providing that with palliative oversight. So there's all of these moments where people go from silo to silo to silo to silo, and they have different teams of people in every silo. And the only people that get to navigate, because all of those silos are tied to money and funding. And so everyone wants to stay in their lane, right? So everyone goes, we'll navigate our silo. We'll navigate just this path because that's where we are. But no one is navigating between the silos in Australia. So people fall through the gaps. People don't get the things that they, would help them because no one knows what to ask, because the only point of continuity from start to finish is going to be the unpaid carers, and if they're lucky enough to have an end-of-life doula. And that is the only holistic oversight that person gets. And so, it's problematic in a lot of ways. And what we're seeing is people not getting, the standards of care, or at least the access to things they're entitled to, because not everyone has the health literacy or the death literacy, or actually just the literacy itself. Like, I live in an area that has, I live in the country, like literally in the country. And, outside the cities down where I am, we've got about a 50% language literacy rate. It's quite low for, a developed country in my area. And so, people who have the economic setback or the, literacy setback or whatever it is, how do you expect them to navigate all of these silos that they have no clue even existed till 10 minutes ago?
Wow, I was not aware of that. So, speaking of death literacy, so knowledge about death and dying, that's something that comes up here in Poland in our conversations a lot, because what we observe is that many people here still have like a living memory of a different time when death did not take place at the hospital. So many people here remember that some decades ago, most people did die at home. And then after the moment of death, the person stayed at home for 1 day or 3 days. And it was a time of wakes and vigils filled with rituals. So on a broader scale, that really disappeared in the 90s. So many people really remember that. It's not like in Germany where these practices kind of disappeared in the 50s. So it's really getting in touch with that is a bigger challenge. But here I think there is still a moment to reconnect with this knowledge. So how is that in Australia? Like an average person does, like, if you ask anybody on the street, how high is the chance that this person will know anything about the dying process?
Well, I think there's some people like who get to their 50s and still have never seen anybody, been up close to anyone who's dying. It's yeah, we're very uh, I think because Australia, the population's so spread out, um, we're not sort of dying on top of each other. It's easy to distance yourself from family members, and so you hear about granny dying, but that's sort of back in the little country town where you grew up, or in another city or in another state, and so it's easier to keep yourself tucked away from death and dying up close. here in Australia, I think. Beck, would you agree with that, Lauren?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so.
yeah, yeah. We because we're such a new country too. I think we sort of got rid of that whole sort of dying at home thing pretty quick. As soon as uh, uh, medicine started to take over and to say, we can uh, save you from everything. It, we're
So
the great white hope sort of thing.
yeah, so
Um,
Australia, inherited their end of life process or their funeral processes through colonization. The Brits came out here and went, this is how we did it back home, this is how we're doing it here.
Mhm.
And in that time, home death was a part of that to start with. And the last 120 odd years, we've lost 5,000 years of knowledge about caring for our dead because the funeral industry as a whole has only existed for 120 to 150 years. And we've been caring for each other for thousands of years. So it's yeah, it's it's social justice work to reclaim that, I think, and to give, it's a way of combating funeral poverty, which is something I don't know whether you get talking about funeral poverty over there, but it's quite a hot topic here. There are people, extending mortgages and taking loans and drawing out their superannuation and like putting themselves into debt to
Mm,
to pay for funerals, and then people who are choosing not to have funerals at all, which is equally problematic for grief. So we've priced people out of ceremony and ritual,
mhm,
and at the same time whittled everything down to ceremony and ritual being the only thing they get to weave their grief and bereavement around, and then telling everyone, half the population, oh sorry, you can't have it, you can't afford it.
mm,
So, it's the reclaiming of doing things ourselves and realizing you don't need funeral directors for, 90% of what that's going to be. It's, but the average person on the street right now would just go, no, no, we call a funeral director.
mm,
And that's what makes these networks that, Taxi put together, that you've put, like, that's what makes these networks so vital, because we all get to come together and share ideas. We get to collaborate together for greater impact, but we also get, a bigger platform, hopefully, to educate people on what is possible.
mm,
Because grief will always look for what is comfortable. So
Mm.
when, at the time of someone dying, their grief will look for what they know. There's got that it looks for something familiar, even if that's a really crap experience they had because that was the funeral director that grandma used, or it might have been a terrible experience. It's still familiar, and it's going to feel better than the unknown for a lot of people. So getting educated ahead of time
mhm.
is vital to this work.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes, I also define this work mostly as educational and social work. And you have now used words like reclaiming. It's about re-empowerment of people to in a certain field that just belongs to us. So maybe let's now try to define actually what our work as a death doula means. Like for many people, when they hear death doula, it's something they have not heard about before. Maybe they have heard about birth doulas, and then people ask us, what are actually death doulas? Or some people Google and try to find a definition, and you can come across different definitions. So, in your perspective, what's the core of this work? Who is a death doula? What does a death doula do? What's our scope of work and our tasks?
Well, it's a non-medical role. That's usually the first thing to make the distinction. So you're not a palliative care nurse. You're not talking about medications or um, all that sort of medical kind of interventions. It's holistic. So it cares for the whole person, and it cares for the whole unit of care, which is the people around the person as well. And it's really varied depending on what the people need. So some people, and depending on the kind of skills that the doula brings too. So there is a lot of uncertainty around what a doula is, because it can be a lot of different things. There's no that I think in Australia we've developed there is one particular course that has developed like a core set of skills that they expect every doula would have skills and qualities. Um, so that's something that's just starting to develop um, and be established. I think they've run a couple of years now. This tertiary course, it's like a TAFE level. I don't know whether, like, if you have school, you can go into university, or you can go to here it's called a TAFE. It's further education. So it's like
Like
trades,
a
plumbers
college.
and furniture makers and people like that learn trades there, and so that's the kind of thing. So it's not a university course as yet. Um, uh, so it could be that someone feels particularly drawn to sitting with someone individual, like just sitting with someone who's actually dying in the terminal phase. It could be that they have a lot of focus on grief counselling, or not even counselling, but if they're particularly good at listening, or some people are really good at all the legal stuff, and they love to support people to get all that stuff done, because I heard a podcast a little while ago where they were interviewing somebody who had, I think she was a doctor, but she'd also experienced a death in the family recently, and she was saying one of the phases of the stages of death, death stages of grief should be called admin, because it's and the number of people I've spoken to who are just overwhelmed by the sheer sort of enormity of this red tape behemoth that happens to them after someone dies, and the things they have to navigate through while they're trying to take care of themselves and navigate with their grief as well. It can be really quite an obstacle, I think, to a lot of people, and it sort of slows down their grieving process. So there's a whole lot of different things that you can do as a doula, but the most important thing is that you walk alongside someone and their family, and you're just someone who's got a bit of experience around death and dying, comfortable with talking about it, comfortable about opening up conversations, and maybe recognizing when someone wants to talk a little bit more about it and giving them a little prod, or managing the complex relationship between carer and person, because usually that started out like as a spouse, and now all of a sudden the spouse is a carer, and all that complex stuff that goes along with when someone's dying, facing death. That the whole sort of the relationships change, and how do you navigate through that without, and so it's great to have someone alongside you that can say, oh, I've seen this before, how about you do this, or if you thought about doing that, and I've seen this happen before, and it's just all that stuff. And I sort of see the doula role as we're sort of like the prophets, pointing the way back to the old ways. And I guess, there'll probably always be a role for someone like the doula, which is sort of like the old medicine woman, that those kind of roles have existed for centuries. But I think the doulas are recognizing how much we need to actually take back death and dying as a social event with a medical component, rather than outsourcing it all to the doctors and letting the doctors tell us what to do. I'll shut up
I
now.
think there's also a level of care coordination I would add to that, in terms of the amount of people in and out, particularly in home death, like the amount of people in and out of that space it can be a lot. Like you've got, when you think about, it's not just the doctors, it's who's driving you to appointments and who's communicating with the people who might be in and out of doing personal care or hygiene and dignity, people, the nurses who are coming, who's going to do social support, who's feeding the kids or picking, walking the dog, who's picking up the shopping, cleaning the house, all of the things that keep life moving as well. And then when you have that many people in and out of a space, and some people might be there twice a week, some people might be there once a month. How do you keep those people on the same page? How do you communicate? A doula's part of the role can be, facilitating some of that communication, even down to, like, I remember when my mum was dying, there was only so many times I could give it an update. Like, people loved her and they wanted to know what was going on, but there's only so many times you can repeat what happened at the doctor's. So, how do so a doula can help facilitate, interesting ways of communicating, with group messages, with emails, with recording voice messages that people can just, dial up and listen to because you turn a phone off. There's lots of tips and tricks we can bring to that space to alleviate some of the things that might otherwise cause burnout as well.
Mm. Now you just shared a bit from your personal experience when your mom was dying. So what brought you to this work? Like, how did you become death doulas? Was it personal experiences that showed you the lack of this, or what? Yeah, how did you become
Uh,
doula?
well, I was funeral first. So I was indoctrinated by the capitalist big boys in the world. And I was just a mainstream funeral director. And I don't say just, I don't mean to, belittle what that is, because it's good work, but I just couldn't understand why we were charging as much as we were and not helping people the way I wanted to help them. And I went on a quest of finding other things and retrained as an end-of-life doula and went, that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to do that. And soon found out that I needed to be both for me and for what I wanted to offer. I wanted it to be holistic. So, and I had skills in funeral and mortuary and things like that. So I wanted to be able to stay with someone while they were dying and look after them after they had died. And so that made sense to me. But yeah, that was a long process that involved fellowship and traveling overseas and learning and bringing some of that knowledge back. So,
and for me, it was just a recognition that there were these gaps. Even as a nurse, I could see people who were, bobbing about in the sea of ignorance about what people didn't know what they didn't know. Like these people facing a life-limiting illness and not really knowing that there was all these things that they could access, and also just a lack of understanding about end of life, and they just didn't know where to go. So as soon as I just stumbled on the role of the death doula and said, oh, wow, this is great, this is what I want to be, then the universe decided, okay, so here, I'll give you some experiences. So my best friend died, and then my next best friend, my soulmate, died. And so I got to cut my teeth on the idea of supporting somebody, up close and personal. Yeah, and to be honest, supporting my soulmate husband and taking care of him was the absolute pinnacle of my entire life. All the things that I'd learned from my nursing and all the other things that I'd learned in my life all came together to look after him. And it sounds strange, but when he died, I was actually euphoric, because I knew that I had been able to bring all of my skills and all of my knowledge in service to giving him the best death that he could have had. So yeah,
Hmm. To me, that sounds
interesting time.
beautiful. Yeah. So the
Lauren, what do
yeah,
I
exactly.
just, yeah, like, because I know you're not a doula, Lauren, but
Mm,
when you signed up to Taxi and the Good Death Impact Network,
mm.
where did you think it was going to take you? Like, where is your knowledge now?
Oh, it's such a journey. And I should say, Beck's using the acronym TAXI, which stands for the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, which is where I work. We just acronym it to TAXI because it's a bit of a mouthful. But I think, well, I joined Taxi 7 years ago, and the network was one of the first projects I was given to work on because it was a piece of work that had arisen out of, a funder here, a philanthropic funder, had sort of uh, given Taxi some money to say, like, what's the state of the end of life sector, as a thing. And we went and talked to some, incredible people about um, the end of life sector, and we just kept hearing how difficult it was to make any type of meaningful change because of there was all these incredible people out there, often working in the grassroots to, help people plan, help educate, do that good work of death literacy. But often what happens is like those people pop up in different places. And as Rose said, like Australia's really big. And so if you're not connected across places, you're ending up like just duplicating things. And so this is a long story around how I got involved, but basically, what happened was I started this project, and I think pretty soon in I was like, it's a sector that and a group of people that feel just so connected to like it's not about death, it's about like life and how we want to be together and how we're connected to ourselves and other people. And I think I just sort of fell forward into it. And I think in the early days I was just like sort of shook with the idea that there's just so many things I didn't have in place or hadn't thought of, like the things that I value about life that I felt like I was ingrained in myself. But then the questions that, would come up as I like went through my own advanced care directive or started my own will, um, was like, oh, I don't have to think about that. I'm in my 30s. Like when I started this network, I'm like, this is something that feels like a long way away. And so I'm one of those people in Australia that was like, death is very far from me because I had the assumption that like, that's for older me to figure out. But it was a big wake up call. And it also started some really great conversations with my parents around, their wishes and what they want. And I think that's like where I feel like the members and for myself, like it's kind of equipped people that I know to have better conversations with one another. And those conversations just set you up really well to stay connected after a loved one passes away because, there's so many things that can be misinterpreted or but if you have really good, clear, honest conversations before, you can really follow through with like love and just enacting wishes well. So, yeah, it's a journey I'm still on. I'm still finishing my will. I still have to like, get it legalized and all that. But at least I've started it,
Did I
and
did
that's
I
due to this network.
did I understand well that a turning point at the beginning, before you started this doula network, was that there was a single person who said, "This is important. I'm going to put money in it." You mentioned that there was like one philanthropic act that enabled this. Did I get that well?
Yes. So we have a pretty small pool of philanthropists in Australia. It's not like Europe or America where there's sort of older money and philanthropists going there, but there is a fantastic philanthropic organization that's more like a trust, and they manage a lot of portfolios, and one of them is for the JO and JR Wicking Trust. And they deal with a whole range of things, but often in this play in the area of aging, dementia, and death and dying. And there is some like wild figure that like, less than 1% of any philanthropic goes to funding goes to death and dying. And a lot of that would be from wicking. They're one of the people that sort of see that like Australia's population is aging at a rapid rate. Like there's obviously the terminology about the generation of folks who are baby boomers or of that era, colloquially. And one of my members was telling me the other day, like, by like I think like 2034, like the large majority of them are going to be moving into the aged care system and death and dying. And the system and services here aren't set up for that amount of people to go through. And also a generation of people who have been used to like choice and agency for their whole lives. And they've changed every system they've been through. And so um, I think the call to action and what this network is trying to gain momentum around is like these things are going to change, and like let's not wait till there's a huge group of people going to through it, and also like let's do it for the people who are currently dying and like could have more choice in those experiences as well.
Yeah. So speaking of system changes, like the profession or the function, the role of a death doula has for some time now been officially part of the system in of the healthcare system. Well, yeah, maybe explain, Beck, what's the situation? It does
So
exist as an official job, but it's not part of the healthcare system, or
yeah, so it's an officially recognized service in that Palliative Care Australia has a fact sheet on end-of-life doulas now COTA, so the Council of the Aging has some education publicly around doulas. So it's now receiving recognition in that way, but not to the point where it's funded across the country. And what's happened in Australia is that we've had 3 or 4 main trainers, right? So unlike, America where there's, God, 100 or whatever, we've had 3 or 4 main trainings. And one of those trainers developed an RTO course to make it like a TAFE course.
what's that?
And
What is
so like what Rose was
Regis.
explaining, it's like a college. So
Yeah.
it's the level between high school and university.
Okay.
There's a thing in between, which is
Registered
like a
training
college.
organisation.
Yeah. And so um they developed a course at that level, and the idea is that it's now like if you do that course, you're what they call accredited,
Good.
and they're looking at rolling that accreditation level doula into institutions. So the idea is to advocate now for that level of doula training to be acceptable into hospitals and nursing homes and institution-based service provision around palliative care. But there will always be I think the majority of doulas will always be unaccredited, because you don't, doula doesn't, if you've got the heart to do the work and the knowledge, you can go and do the work without doing training. Like it's doula is about showing up, and it's about the service. And for people who want to work in community, like I'm at the other end of the spectrum where I have done the Cert 4. I have done all of the trainings pretty much, and except for one of them that I wrote modules for. So like I know what all the trainings are, but I also know that it's about showing up. So if in Australia, the landscape is rapidly changing. And the conversation that we're having at the moment is, one of the things I've been really interested in is how to even the playing field now that we're seeing this delineation between accredited and non-accredited doulas. So, because Australia is the first country in the world to have a government certified RTO for end-of-life doula. And so this division that is emerging between are you like what we call Cert 4, have you got the Cert 4 or not? the conversations are now about that division and how we even the playing field for everyone. And there's some really interesting ideas that myself and a couple of others have floated as to how we approach that. So there's an organisation we've got called Held in Australia, and I approached one of them probably 18 months ago, or just short of, and said, what about looking at micro-credentialing like they're doing in America, and sort of pitched that idea. So that's one idea that's floating around at the moment. But yeah, it's a developing landscape, but the upshot is what we're seeing is there are certain places now that are employing doulas, and there are doulas who are working full-time as doulas, quitting their other jobs and just going to work as doulas and getting paid to do it. So, it's an emerging space, but the accreditation process has definitely made for really interesting developments here.
The
That's
other difficulty, I think, particularly is the the two problems of one is it's a fee for service, so it's private. You're a private contractor, and so you have to charge a certain amount to sustain yourself. Um, and Australians aren't used to paying for things like that. They're happy to pay for the physio and the um, chiropractor and the podiatrist. So they're used to paying for that. But as soon as they think that you know generally because healthcare is basically free, um, it's harder to get people to get their heads around the fact that they would be paying for somebody to come and do this as well.
Mm.
And the other side of that is um, that that we know around the social determinants of health that generally you say, oh, cancer doesn't discriminate. Well, it actually does. So generally, people are on a lower socioeconomic status. Their health is worse, so their health outcomes are worse. And so we often see, say, in the palliative care team I work for, um, definitely a large proportion of our patient cohort are in the lower socioeconomic band. So they're the ones that need the most help, and they're often the ones that don't have any capacity to pay for this private service. So
Yeah.
it's sort of, you've got those kind of things going on as well, particularly in rural areas, when you've got um,
yeah.
sort of a greater collection of, say, like a whole town that's just sort of fairly low down on the rung. It's just really hard to sort of break into that kind of environment, even though those people really need support.
And it goes beyond socioeconomic too. Like it's actually a fallacy to say
Oh,
we're all equal in death. Like, that death is the great equalizer, and because fat bodies, queer bodies, trans bodies, people who are lower socioeconomic, like there are so many ways in which we are unequal in death, and the financial equity and access is a huge part of that.
mm,
Mm.
This is one of the things I love about like having members like Beck and Rose. This is just like a quick little plug for members because they just are very good at not talking about themselves sometimes. But things like Becca's done programs like creating death care leaders, which is all about like equipping people at that level in community beyond like doula training with free training that they can access around death literacy and death care so that people can feel more empowered to make choices if it's like maybe a loved one dying or people that they know or just someone in their community. And Rose has also run the Good to Go festival and network, which is an incredible group of people coming together in like regional places to talk about this as well and to like run more spaces for people to ask questions about like death and dying. And I think those kind of things help us. It's an ecosystem. We need the death doulas, we need the medical practitioners, but we also need everyone in Australia to have like a basic level of death literacy so that we can feel um, yeah, I guess better able to make those decisions.
Yeah, that's actually what we've been focusing on here in Poland so far with our NGO, like organizing workshops and lectures in different formats to raise death literacy in a broad way. Of course, we're still working on a small scale, and it still is a niche, but it's also gaining some momentum. So what we've been doing so far is organizing events that are open for everybody and everybody can participate. And now we are working on a doula course. It's not there yet. So right now there is no full doula education way in Poland. And also, when I look at these courses in different countries, they tend to be so different. I mean, you can find courses that are like a year, 1.5 year, or 2 year with a lot of like intensive uh, blocks and yeah, also you pay a lot of money to participate. And then you can find like an online weekend doula course where you get some kind of strange certificate after watching like 3 webinars that now you're a death doula. So what do you think? What kind of topics should be covered in such a course? Like what's the bare minimum, or what would be like a really good curriculum that should be in the death doula training?
I might go first with that. Um, I think it's the bare minimum is the capacity, right? So, it doesn't matter whether you do a year-long training or a 3-day intense training, right? If you leave that training without the feeling of capacity or the confidence to show up, because no one's going to have all the answers and no one expects you to. And it doesn't matter how long you've trained for. Stuff will always take you by surprise. You have to have the heart to show up and the capacity to go, great question, let's find out together. Or, who can we ask to come and help troubleshoot this? Like it's inside what you need to, you've got it or you don't. And the training helps. And I think that before you can go, what do we want to put into a training course, you actually have to ask yourself what the scope of that role is for you first. Because until you decide for yourself what the scope is of the doula you want at the end of that course, you can't decide what you're putting into it.
Yeah. I think doulaing is something most people that I speak to who end up in this situation, you just feel like it does feel like a calling. It's sort of like when people discover what this role is about, there's this sense of, oh, yes, I really want to be that. It's not sort of like, oh, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Oh, this will do. But I know I do a lot of teaching in my actual job as a palliative care nurse. I teach aged care workers, and the heart of palliative care is communication. It's not, how many milligrams of morphine to give somebody when they've got pain or anything like that. It's about communication. So I think any course that's got to do with doulaing has to have some grounding in communication and creating psychological and cultural safety for somebody to feel like to be able to create some kind of a space where people feel comfortable to open up um, and explore death and dying without everyone else around them freaking out. It's about allowing the wisdom to bubble up, rather than being telling people what they're doing all the time or instructing people. It's about allowing that natural wisdom to just arise. But, that's a skill to be able to hold that space for people.
It is. And I think there's a very healthy element of it's not about you. And I don't know what you'd call that training. Anti-ego training. I don't know. It's
Ego
like,
training. I
like,
love
and
that.
like, it's, sometimes you have to learn to put your own baggage down meet people where they're at, because sometimes people will want things and you might go, your internal voice might go, that is a monumentally horrible idea. That's probably, but it's still their idea. And it's your job to show up and help them explore that, because it's not about you. Doula work is not about being the savior and going in and fixing. That's the big thing. And I don't know, Rose, because you're a nurse, but when nurses stop being nurses and start being doulas, one of the big things, one of the conversations sometimes we have is, now you need to unlearn the nursing part of you, because there is now nothing to fix. You can suggest, you can guide, you can handhold, you can shepherd, but your job is not a risk assessment and fix. And it's like doula is about a presence and a willingness to show up.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the biggest learnings that I've had since I started working with the palliative care team, was the understanding that people will do dying their own way. And I could have a million great ideas and try and fix, because nurses love to fix things, and say, oh, we put this in and that service, and we'll get this person to come and help you, and it'll be great. And then the person turns around and says, no, I don't think so. So it's just that humility of saying, okay, yeah, I'm in your hand, I'll do whatever. I'm on your team. But I'm trying to empower you to be the designer of your own experience, and I'm just here to support and advocate and navigate.
Yep. And don't be afraid. The other thing doulas need to learn is that it's not you don't have to have all the answers, and it's okay to ask for help. Like if something happens and it's out of left field, you need enough information. You need to be armed with enough grit to be able, and knowledge to just be able to go, right, I'm picking up the phone, I'm going to ask this question, I'm going to network with this person. All right, like you are, to use one of Lauren's gorgeous words, you are a weaver of all of the things that are available into that space, and what you weave is hopefully a way of holding that person and their families in the dying.
Yeah.
And you weave enough to create that safety net.
That's a beautiful
one other thing that I often say is that palliative care is a team sport. So, we're delivering holistic care to somebody. So we're caring for the whole person, which means you have to bring your whole self to it. But it's also you can't be everything for that person. And that's why I love the idea of a collective and teams of doulas that can meet the person wherever they need it, because there's a team all with their own particular skills and strengths that can minister to the person and the family depending on what they need at the time. So
and that's where doulas are working really strongly in certain places in Australia. It's because, well, partly at least because we have those networks. Where I live in Lutruwita, we have we have like a WhatsApp chat group, and every time there's a new doula that does some training, it doesn't matter where they've trained, we'll roll them into that chat group, and we get together every 2 months to have like a lunch or a dinner. But we can and we're now seeing collaborations. We've got one doula who stepped back from being a doula to just full-time coordinate the work of other doulas. So I think she's got 7 or 8 subcontractors now, and she's got people who are working full-time as doulas, and she's giving them, she's coordinating that care for people in the community. And because we come together and we build a network. And I know one of my doula colleagues has really good strengths with the aged care system. So if I have a client who's getting an ACAT assessment, I might take her to that assessment. Like I'll say, can you come and see my person today because X, Y, and Z. And if, one of the other doula's clients is getting close to dying, they might say, you probably need to have a chat to Beck about what that's going to be, or, how you want your body cared for, or whatever. Because, so we all know each other's strengths and weaknesses. We're all connected in a chat group and with each other. And so we get to not be precious about, oh, that's my client or whatever. Like we honestly just want the best for that person. And so we can bring whoever is in our orbit, who can provide what that person needs.
Thank you for these insights. Like when I was listening to you, I had one thought in my mind that makes the doula work for me so different from other types of work. Maybe in other professions, when you get into the fields of particular, I don't know, skill, the goal is that you will have all the answers, or that you will be, yeah, you will always know how to react. But in this field of service, like being in the position where you don't know is rather the norm than the exception. So we have to be like comfortable in this place where there are no like 100% answers. And that's a certain
Yes.
skill to be in
It's
that
an art.
place very often and not
Yeah.
freak out and not run away.
But like, how many of you have had children? So any of you had children, right? So if you've had children, you don't have all the answers, right? And if you were going to ever wait to be ready to have children, everyone would be childless, right? Because you're never actually ready for it. So it's the same. It's a willingness to show up and just genuinely want to help.
Mm. I think these are
Yes.
really that's the best words to maybe close now this first part, the willingness to show up and help. That's the core probably of not only doulas, but it could be the core of who we are for each other as humans here, right?
Community.
Yeah. So I will now, in a moment, I will switch off the camera. So the people who will now, who will watch this later as a recording, this is where the recording will end, because now we will open the conversation and invite all our participants to to join us.